If you could hear someone's pain through music, would you dare to listen? And if you could heal them, but couldn't heal yourself, what then? Picture this Washington Square Park on an ordinary Tuesday evening. A crowd of strangers stands in complete silence. Some are crying. Others have their hands over their hearts. All of them are staring at one man. A black man in his late 30s sitting at a weathered upright piano, his fingers moving across the keys like he's speaking a language only the soul can understand. This is the story of that man. A man nobody saw until it was too late, or perhaps until it was exactly the right time. His name was Isaiah Bennett, and this is how he became visible. To understand that moment, we need to go back 6 months earlier, to be exact. Washington Square Park in Manhattan, the heart of Greenwich Village. A place where artists, students, tourists, and New Yorkers intersect in a constant dance of movement and noise. And in the middle of it all, there was Isaiah. Every day, around 3 in the afternoon, he would appear. Same corner, same piano, same worn leather jacket, even in summer. But here's the strange thing. Nobody really looked at him. People walked past, joggers ran by, couples took selfies with the arch in the background. Street performers battled for attention. But Isaiah, he was invisible. Not literally, of course, but in the way that matters most in a city like New York. People didn't see him. They looked through him, past him, around him. He was part of the scenery. Background noise. Another street musician trying to make rent. Except he never had a tip jar, no open piano case, no sign asking for donations. He just played. And every so often, something remarkable would happen. Someone would stop. Not because the melody was loud or flashy, but because it felt like the music was speaking directly to them. Like every note was written for their ears alone. And then they would cry. A businessman in a suit would pause mid-step, tears streaming down his face. A young woman with headphones would pull them off her hand, covering her mouth. An elderly man would sit on a nearby bench, his whole body shaking with sobs. And Isaiah, he never looked up, never acknowledged them, just kept playing, his eyes closed, his face unreadable. Why would a simple melody make a stranger weep? The answer lies in 5 people. 5 lives that intersected with Isaiah's music. 5 stories that reveal not just who they were, but who Isaiah was, and why he chose to become invisible. Let's start with the first. Vanessa Brooks was 34 years old, though most days she felt twice that. 3 jobs, 2 kids, 0 time for herself. She was a home health aide in the mornings, a waitress at a diner during lunch shifts, and she cleaned offices at night. Her alarm went off at 5 a.m. She didn't get home until after midnight. Her daughter Aisha was 7. Her son Marcus was 5. Good kids, smart kids, kids who deserved better than powdered mac and cheese for dinner 4 nights a week, and a mother too exhausted to read them bedtime stories. Vanessa told herself she was doing her best, that this was temporary, that someday things would be easier. But she was drowning, and nobody knew it. On the outside, Vanessa was the strong black woman everyone expected her to be. At work, she smiled. At her kids' school, she volunteered. At church, she sang in the choir. But on the inside, she was screaming. The day she met Isaiah's music, Vanessa had just finished her morning shift. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman she cared for, had held her hand and said, "You look tired, sweetheart. Are you taking care of yourself?" And Vanessa had lied. "I'm fine. Don't you worry about me." But she wasn't fine. She was walking through Washington Square Park on her way to the diner, her feet already aching in shoes held together with super glue, when she heard it. A melody. Soft. Almost a lullaby. She stopped. The music seemed to wrap around her like arms she didn't have anymore. Her mother had passed 3 years ago. Her ex-husband was gone. She was alone in this fight. And this melody, it sounded like the song her mother used to hum when Vanessa was little. When things were hard and money was tight, but love was abundant. Vanessa looked around for the source. That's when she saw him. The man at the piano, playing like he was inside her memories. Her vision blurred. Her throat tightened. And before she could stop herself, Vanessa Brooks, the woman who never cried in public, who never showed weakness, who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders without complaint, broke down, right there, in the middle of the park. She sank onto a bench, her hands covering her face, and she sobbed. Deep, shaking sobs that came from a place she'd kept locked for years. The music continued. Gentle, understanding. Like it was saying, it's okay. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to hurt. When she finally looked up, her mascara was ruined and her eyes were red. But something inside her felt lighter. She walked over to the piano. Isaiah's eyes were closed. He didn't see her approach. Vanessa pulled out a crumpled $5 bill from her pocket. It was supposed to be for lunch, but she placed it on the piano anyway. Isaiah's eyes opened briefly. He looked at her. Really looked. And for a second, Vanessa felt like he could see everything. Every sleepless night. Every sacrifice. Every moment she thought she couldn't go on. Then he nodded once and went back to playing. Vanessa walked away, but something had shifted. That evening, when Aisha asked Mommy, "Why do you always look sad?" Vanessa didn't give her usual answer. Instead, she sat down, pulled her daughter close, and said, "Because sometimes grown-ups get tired, baby. But that doesn't mean I'm not happy to be your mommy. You and your brother. You're my everything." Aisha hugged her tight. "You're my everything too." And for the first time in months, Vanessa cried in front of her children. Not tears of despair, but tears of release, because a stranger's melody had reminded her she wasn't failing. She was fighting. And that was enough. But here's what Vanessa didn't know. Isaiah hadn't just played a random lullaby. He had heard something in her footsteps, in the way she carried herself, the weight in her shoulders, the rhythm of exhaustion. And he had played exactly what she needed to hear. How Vanessa would spend weeks wondering. She would return to the park multiple times, hoping to ask him. But every time she approached, the words caught in her throat. Because the question she really wanted to ask was, "Who are you?" And she sensed that was a question Isaiah Bennett wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Thomas Sullivan was 52 years old and tired of waking up. For 28 years, he'd been a firefighter with the FDNY, Engine Company 10, right next to the World Trade Center site. He'd been there on 9/11. He'd seen things no human should see. But that wasn't what broke him. In 2019, there was a fire in a Bronx apartment building. 4th floor. Thomas was first in. He found a woman unconscious in the hallway, got her out, went back for her son. The boy was 6 years old, hiding in a closet. Thomas reached him just as part of the ceiling collapsed. He got the boy out, saved his life. But Thomas's back never recovered. 3 herniated discs, chronic pain, early retirement, and that's when everything fell apart. Without the firehouse, Thomas didn't know who he was. His marriage crumbled. His kids were grown and distant. The pills for the pain led to darker places. By the time he encountered Isaiah's music, Thomas Sullivan had made a decision. Today would be his last day. He had it all planned. He'd written letters to his ex-wife and his kids. He'd paid his bills. He'd even cleaned his apartment so nobody would have to deal with a mess. He was walking through Washington Square Park one final time, saying goodbye to the city he'd protected for nearly 3 decades. That's when he heard the piano. At first, he almost kept walking. What was the point? But something in the melody stopped him. It wasn't sad. It wasn't happy. It was brave. Thomas stood there 50 feet from the piano, listening. The music swelled. It reminded him of the sound of sirens, the rush of adrenaline. The moment he ran into that building in the Bronx, not knowing if he'd come out. The melody seemed to ask him a question. If you were brave enough to run into burning buildings for strangers, why aren't you brave enough to keep living for yourself? Thomas's knees weakened. He sat down heavily on a bench. The pain in his back flared, but he barely noticed, because a different kind of pain was surfacing. The pain of giving up, of letting the fire win, of dying not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet apartment alone and forgotten. Is this what he wanted? Is this what those 28 years meant? The music changed, softer now, like a hand on a shoulder, like a voice saying, "You're not done yet." Thomas pulled out his phone. He looked at the letters he'd written saved in his notes app, and he deleted them, all of them. His hands were shaking. Tears were streaming down his face. An elderly couple walking by gave him a concerned look, but he didn't care. He stood up. His back screamed in protest. But he walked over to the piano. Isaiah was playing with his eyes closed, lost in the music. "Hey, Thomas," said his voice rough. Isaiah's eyes opened. I needed to say thank you." Isaiah looked at him, really looked at him, and Thomas saw something in those eyes he didn't expect. Pain. Deep, old pain. The kind you carry every single day. "I know what you're running from," Thomas said quietly. "Because I've been running too." Isaiah's hands stilled on the keys. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two men. Two different stories. But the same weight. Then Isaiah nodded once. A small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. Thomas swallowed hard. "Whatever it is you lost, I hope you find a way back." He turned and walked away. And for the first time in years, Thomas Sullivan had somewhere to go. Not home, not yet, but to the volunteer fire safety program at the local community center. He'd seen a flyer months ago. They needed instructors to teach kids about fire safety. Maybe he couldn't run into burning buildings anymore, but he could make sure fewer kids ended up hiding in closets waiting to be rescued. That was something. That was purpose. As Thomas left the park, he glanced back once. Isaiah was playing again. But Thomas could have sworn there was the slightest change in his posture, like maybe, just maybe, Thomas's words had reached him. Because here's the thing about healing, sometimes the person being healed isn't the only one who needs it. Midpoint reflection. 20, 30. Thomas would return to the park over the following weeks. Not to talk to Isaiah, just to listen. And to watch. And he noticed something strange. Isaiah never smiled, never showed emotion. But there was a sadness in his eyes that went deeper than anything Thomas had seen even in the faces of people he'd pulled from collapsed buildings. Whatever Isaiah was carrying, it was heavier than physical pain. It was the kind of weight that comes from guilt, from loss, from believing you failed the one person who mattered most. Thomas recognized it because he'd felt it too. Every time he thought about that ceiling collapsing, every time he wondered if he could have moved faster, been stronger, saved that boy without destroying his own body. But Thomas had learned something in his years as a firefighter. Sometimes you save people not by being perfect, but by showing up, by trying, by refusing to give up. Isaiah was still showing up. Every day, playing for strangers. But who was playing for him? Hannah Price was 29 years old and had stopped dreaming 3 years ago. She worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm in Midtown. Spreadsheets, tax returns, numbers that meant nothing. It was stable. It paid well. Her parents were proud. And Hannah wanted to die. Not literally, not like Thomas, but in the way that matters when you're young and the future stretches out like a prison sentence. When you realize you've traded your soul for a 401k. Hannah had gone to art school. Painting was her life. She was good, really good. Her professors said she had a future. Galleries were interested. But art doesn't pay bills. And when her father got sick during her senior year, Hannah made a choice. She switched majors, got her accounting degree, got a job, took care of her family. Her father recovered. But Hannah never went back to painting. The brushes sat in a box in her closet. Her canvases gathered dust. Her sketchbook, the one she used to carry everywhere, stayed closed, until the day she heard Isaiah play. It was a Saturday. Hannah had just left a client meeting. Yes, she worked Saturdays now. Because what else was there? She was cutting through Washington Square Park earbuds and trying to drown out her thoughts with a podcast about cryptocurrency. Something she needed to understand for work. Something she didn't care about at all. But then she heard it. Even through her earbuds. A melody that cut through the noise. She pulled them out. The music was alive. That's the only word for it. Every note seemed to pulse with color, with movement, with the kind of energy Hannah used to feel when she stood in front of a blank canvas. She walked toward the sound, a man at a piano, playing like he was painting with sound. Hannah stopped. Her hand unconsciously went to her bag. Inside was her old sketchbook. She'd been carrying it for weeks now, like a talisman, a reminder of who she used to be. She never opened it. What was the point? But now her fingers itched. The music swelled. It wasn't asking her permission. It was demanding she pay attention. Hannah sat down on a bench. She pulled out the sketchbook. The cover was worn, coffee-stained. The edges curled from years of use and then years of neglect. She opened it. The last drawing was from 3 years ago, a self-portrait. But it didn't look like her anymore. That girl had hope in her eyes. Hannah flipped to a blank page. Her hand was shaking. When was the last time she'd held a pencil for anything other than checking boxes on a tax form? She looked at the man playing piano, and she started to draw. At first her lines were hesitant, rusty, wrong. But the music kept playing, and slowly something shifted. Her hand remembered. The muscle memory came back. She drew Isaiah, not as he appeared, but as she felt him. The music made visible. In her drawing, he wasn't invisible. He was radiating light. But there was something in his eyes, something heavy, a weight that bent his shoulders. Hannah drew for 20 minutes, the longest she'd focused on anything other than spreadsheets in 3 years. When she finally looked up, her face was wet with tears. Isaiah was still playing, eyes closed, lost in the music. Hannah looked down at her drawing. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't gallery ready, but it was real. It was hers. She tore the page carefully from her sketchbook, walked over to the piano, placed the drawing on top. Isaiah's eyes opened. He looked at the drawing, then at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hannah said, "Thank you for reminding me. Reminding you of what Isaiah's voice was quiet, the first time he'd spoken all day. That I'm still in here somewhere." Isaiah looked back at the drawing, at his own face transformed through Hannah's eyes. "You made me visible," he said softly. "You made me remember how to see." Hannah walked away. But that night she didn't go home and watch Netflix until she fell asleep. She went to her closet, pulled out the box, set up her easel for the first time in 3 years, and she painted. She painted until 3 a.m. She painted until her back ached and her eyes burned. She painted a man at a piano in a park, surrounded by invisible threads connecting him to dozens of people walking by. Some threads were bright, others were dark. All of them were real. On Monday, Hannah walked into her boss's office and gave 2 weeks' notice. She didn't have a plan, didn't have savings to last more than a few months. But she had something more important. She had herself back. And it started with a melody that refused to let her keep hiding. Tension loop. Suro, 32. Over the next few weeks, Hannah returned to the park often. She filled sketchbooks with drawings of Isaiah, each one revealing something new about him. In one drawing, he looked young, hopeful, like someone who once believed music could save the world. In another, he looked broken, like someone who learned the hard way that some things can't be saved. Hannah didn't know his story, but she knew this. The man playing that piano was both healer and wounded, both invisible and the only person worth seeing. And she wondered, what had he lost? What had hurt him so badly that he chose to disappear? William Carter had been invisible for 8 years. Not metaphorically, literally. People looked through homeless people, especially in Manhattan, especially the ones who'd been on the streets so long they became part of the landscape. Bill was 63 years old. He'd been a philosophy professor at Columbia University, tenured, published, respected. Then his wife died. Breast cancer. 18 months of treatment. 18 months of watching the love of his life wither away. After she passed, Bill tried to keep going. He really did. But the grief was too much. He started drinking. At first, just to sleep. Then to function. Then to forget. He lost his job, his apartment, his dignity. For 8 years, he'd been living on the streets, a sleeping bag under the bridge, meals at soup kitchens, invisible. Bill had stopped thinking of himself as a person. He was a problem, a statistic, something people stepped around on their way to important places. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Until Isaiah's music. Bill spent most of his days in Washington Square Park. It was safer than some other spots. Lots of people. Less likely to get harassed. He'd noticed Isaiah before, hard not to. The man was there every day, playing that piano like his life depended on it. But Bill never paid much attention. Music was for people who still had something to feel. Bill had numbed himself so thoroughly, he wasn't sure he could feel anything anymore. Then one afternoon, Bill was sitting on his usual bench, nursing a bottle in a paper bag, when the melody changed. It was different, deeper. It sounded like dignity. That was the only word Bill could think of. The music sounded like what dignity would sound like if it had a voice. Bill looked up. Isaiah was playing with his eyes open this time, and he was looking right at Bill. Not through him, not past him, at him. Bill froze. When was the last time someone looked at him like he was human? The music continued, and Bill felt something crack inside his chest. Something that had been frozen for 8 years. He started to cry. Big, ugly, gasping sobs. The kind that come from a place beyond words, beyond thought. He cried for his wife, for the life he'd lost, for the man he used to be, for the man he'd become. He cried because someone was seeing him, and it hurt. God, it hurt. But it also felt like relief. When the music stopped, Bill wiped his face with a dirty sleeve. He stood up, his joints protesting, and walked over to the piano. Isaiah was still looking at him. "You saw me," Bill said. His voice was hoarse from disuse. "You actually saw me." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Why?" "Because you're here," Isaiah said simply. "That's enough." Bill's throat tightened. "I haven't been enough for a long time." "You're here," Isaiah repeated. "You survived. That's more than enough." Bill didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood there, and Isaiah started playing again. A different melody, softer, like a hand reaching out. Bill sat down on the ground next to the piano, right there in the dirt, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen, acknowledged, human. Over the following weeks, Bill kept coming back. Not just to listen, but to be there, to exist in proximity to someone who saw him. And slowly, something began to change. Bill started going to the shelter instead of sleeping outside, started eating at the soup kitchen instead of skipping meals, started thinking maybe, just maybe, there was a way back. He wasn't there yet, but he'd taken the first step. And it started with a melody that said, "You matter. You exist. You are worth seeing." But Bill noticed something else too, something that haunted him. When Isaiah played, there was a look in his eyes. A look Bill recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror for 8 years. The look of someone who was running, hiding, trying to disappear. One day Bill said to him, "I know you're running from something. I know because I am too." Isaiah's hands paused on the keys. He looked at Bill. Really looked. "What are you running from?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Myself," Bill said. "What about you?" Isaiah was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The same." They didn't talk more about it that day, but a connection had been made. 2 invisible men seeing each other. Rebecca Anderson was 33 years old and terrified of being happy again. 14 months ago, her husband Daniel died in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. Daniel was on his way home from work. He died instantly. Rebecca had been a widow for over a year, and the grief had been manageable. Barely, but manageable. She went to therapy, joined a support group, took things one day at a time. She still wore her wedding ring, still slept on her side of the bed, still called his phone sometimes just to hear his voicemail. But lately something had changed. There was a man at her office. His name was Ryan. He was kind, funny, patient. He'd asked her to coffee 3 times. She'd said no 3 times. But last week she'd said yes. And she'd enjoyed it. She'd laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time since Daniel died, she'd felt something other than grief. And then the guilt hit her like a truck. What kind of wife was she? Daniel had been gone barely a year, and she was already moving on, already laughing with another man, already feeling attracted. It felt like a betrayal, like she was erasing Daniel's memory, like she was saying he didn't matter. Rebecca couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The guilt was eating her alive. She was walking through Washington Square Park, heading nowhere in particular, when she heard the music. A waltz. Slow, romantic, bittersweet. It sounded exactly like the song she and Daniel had danced to at their wedding. Not the same song, but the same feeling. Rebecca stopped walking. Her hand went to her chest. The music swirled around her, and suddenly she was back there, in the venue, in her white dress, in Daniel's arms. He'd been a terrible dancer, kept stepping on her feet. They'd both laughed so hard they could barely finish the dance. The memory was so vivid, so real, that Rebecca could almost feel his hands on her waist. And then the melody changed. It kept the same structure, the same rhythm, but the tone shifted. From bittersweet to hopeful, like the song was saying, "Remember him, but don't stop dancing." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of release, because she suddenly understood something she'd been too afraid to face. Loving Daniel didn't mean she had to stop living. Moving forward didn't erase the past. Daniel would have wanted her to be happy. He'd told her as much, actually, in one of those late-night conversations couples have when they're young and think they're invincible. If anything ever happens to me, he'd said, "Promise me you won't spend your whole life being sad. Promise me you'll find someone who makes you laugh as much as I do. Promise me you'll be happy." She'd laughed and told him nothing was going to happen. But something did. And now she had to honor that promise. Rebecca walked over to the piano. The man playing was younger than she expected, mid-30s, black, handsome, but there was a sadness in his face that made her heart ache. When the song ended, she said, "That song, it was perfect." Isaiah looked up at her. "Was it? You knew exactly what I needed to hear. Sometimes the music knows better than we do." Rebecca twisted her wedding ring. "Can I ask you something?" Isaiah nodded. "Have you lost someone too?" Isaiah's hands stilled on the keys. His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said quickly. "That was too personal." "Yes," Isaiah said quietly. "I have. How did you keep going?" Isaiah looked at her with eyes that held years of pain. "I'm not sure I did. I think I just started hiding instead." Rebecca frowned. Hiding from the pain, from the guilt, from everything. "Does it work?" Isaiah was quiet for a moment. "No, it doesn't." Rebecca felt tears on her cheeks. "I don't want to hide, but I don't know how to move forward without feeling like I'm leaving him behind." Isaiah started playing again, softly. "Maybe moving forward doesn't mean leaving him behind. Maybe it means taking him with you. In here." He nodded toward her heart. Rebecca looked down at her wedding ring. She twisted it one more time, and then slowly she slid it off her finger. She held it in her palm. It felt lighter than she expected. "Thank you," she whispered. Isaiah just nodded and kept playing. Rebecca walked away. She put the ring on a chain around her neck, close to her heart, where Daniel would always be. But her finger was free now, free to move forward, free to hold someone else's hand if she wanted to. That night, she texted Ryan, "Would you like to try that coffee again?" He responded immediately, "I'd love to." And for the first time in 14 months, Rebecca Anderson smiled without feeling guilty about it. Chum. Escalation 49. 0051 hour. Before she left the park that day, Rebecca turned back once. Isaiah was still playing, but his shoulders were shaking slightly. Was he crying? Rebecca almost went back, almost asked if he was okay. But something stopped her. Because she realized this man spent his days healing everyone else. But who was healing him? Who was helping him take off his ring? Who was giving him permission to move forward? Rebecca didn't know his story, but she knew pain when she saw it. And Isaiah Bennett was drowning in it. 3 weeks after Rebecca's visit, something changed. It was a Thursday afternoon. Isaiah was playing as usual. The park was busy. People were everywhere. And then an elderly woman approached the piano. She was in her 70s. White hair, kind eyes. She walked with a cane, but moved with purpose. She stood in front of Isaiah, waiting. Isaiah finished the song, opened his eyes, saw her, and froze. "Hello, Isaiah," the woman said gently. Isaiah's hands dropped from the keys. "Margaret, it's been 3 years." Isaiah said nothing. Margaret Walsh had been the chair of the music department at Juilliard. She'd been Isaiah's mentor, his advocate, his friend. "You disappeared," Margaret said. "One day you were there, and the next you were just gone. I had to, because of Caleb." Isaiah flinched at the name, like it physically hurt to hear it. Margaret sat down on the bench beside him. "I've been looking for you for 3 years. Do you know how many people asked about you? How many students wanted to know where you went? I couldn't go back. Why are you here, Isaiah? Playing in a park where nobody knows who you are." Isaiah stared at the keys. "Because nobody knowing who I am is the point." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what happened. Please." Isaiah's voice was barely a whisper. "I failed him." "No, I did." Isaiah's hands were shaking now. "Caleb needed me. He was depressed. He was struggling. And I was too busy, too focused on my career, too obsessed with being the best." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He tried to talk to me." Isaiah continued. "So many times. But I was always preparing for the next performance, the next masterclass, the next achievement. I told him we'd talk later. I told him I'd make time. But I never did. Isaiah. The night he died, I was at Carnegie Hall, performing Rachmaninoff, the concert of my career. Standing ovation. Critics called it transcendent." Isaiah's voice cracked. "And while I was taking my bows, my 16-year-old son was in our apartment writing a note that said he didn't want to be here anymore." Margaret covered her mouth with her hand. "I came home to find him." Isaiah whispered. "I found my son, Margaret, and all I could think was I was playing piano while he was dying. I chose music over him, and now he's gone." The words hung in the air like a weight. "So yes," Isaiah said. "I disappeared. I gave up my position, my students, my reputation, everything. Because what good is any of it if I couldn't save my own son? Margaret was crying now. Caleb's death wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? No. Depression is a disease, Isaiah. You didn't cause it. You couldn't have prevented it. I could have been there. I could have listened. I could have put down my damn career for 5 minutes and seen what was right in front of me. And so your punishment is to become invisible, to play for strangers who don't know your name. Isaiah looked at her. I'm not punishing myself. I'm trying to do what I should have done for Caleb. I'm trying to see people, really see them, hear what they're not saying. Be there when they need someone. But who's there for you? Isaiah had no answer for that. Margaret stood up slowly. Isaiah Bennett, you were the most talented musician I ever taught. But more than that, you were kind. You were generous. You cared about your students, not about my son. You loved Caleb more than anything in this world. He knew that. Even in his pain, he knew that. Isaiah shook his head. You don't know that. I do. Because he left you a letter too. Did you ever read it? Isaiah's face went pale. I couldn't. Margaret reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope. Yellowed with age. His therapist gave this to me when she couldn't find you. She asked me to hold on to it, in case you ever came back. She placed the envelope on the piano. Read it, Isaiah. Please, you owe him that much. Margaret touched his shoulder once. Then she walked away. Isaiah sat there staring at the envelope. His son's handwriting. His name written in Caleb's careful script. He couldn't breathe. For 3 years he'd been running from this. From the guilt. From the pain. From the truth. But maybe Margaret was right. Maybe he owed Caleb this. With shaking hands, Isaiah opened the envelope. Caleb's letter. Read aloud by Isaiah. 5300, 54, 30. Dad, I don't know how to start this. I've tried writing this letter 100 times and it never comes out right. I don't want you to blame yourself. I know you will. You always take responsibility for everything. But this isn't your fault. Depression is like drowning on dry land. You can't breathe, but you can't explain why. People keep asking what's wrong, and you don't know what to tell them because nothing specific is wrong. Everything is wrong. And nothing at the same time. I know you tried. I know you were busy, but I also know you loved me. You showed me every day, even when you were stressed or exhausted. You came to my school concerts. You helped me with homework. You told me you were proud of me. But I couldn't feel it, Dad. Not because you didn't do enough, but because depression took that away from me. It took away my ability to feel love, to feel anything except pain and emptiness. I need you to know. This isn't because you failed. This is because my brain is broken and I don't know how to fix it anymore. I love you. I love you so much. And I'm sorry I'm doing this to you. Please don't stop playing piano. Please don't give up music because of me. Music was always your way of speaking to the world. Don't let my death silence you. Play for me, Dad. Play for all the things I won't get to experience. Play for the life I wanted but couldn't have. And please, please forgive yourself. I already forgive you for anything you think you did wrong. There's nothing to forgive. I love you. Caleb. Isaiah couldn't see through his tears. The letter was shaking in his hands. Caleb had forgiven him. Caleb had loved him. Caleb had known. And for 3 years, Isaiah had been carrying a burden that his son had explicitly asked him not to carry. Isaiah folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, put it in his jacket pocket right over his heart. And then he put his hands on the keys. And he played. Not for strangers, not for healing, not for penance. He played for Caleb. The melody that came out of that piano was unlike anything Isaiah had played before. It was grief, raw and unfiltered. It was love, desperate and aching. It was goodbye, final and necessary. People in the park stopped, not because they understood, but because the emotion was so powerful it was impossible to ignore. And then something remarkable happened. Vanessa appeared. She'd been walking by on her way home from work. She heard the music, heard the pain in it, and she walked over. Thomas was there too. He'd come to the park specifically to listen, as he did most days now. Hannah arrived with her sketchbook. She'd been sitting on the other side of the park drawing. Bill came from his bench, moving slowly but with purpose. And Rebecca, who happened to be passing through on her way to meet Ryan, stopped. They all converged on Isaiah, without speaking, without planning. They formed a circle around him. Isaiah's eyes were closed. He didn't see them. He was lost in the music, lost in the memory of his son. The song built, higher, more intense, a crescendo of everything he'd been holding inside for 3 years. And then Vanessa reached out, placed her hand on Isaiah's shoulder. Isaiah's eyes flew open. He saw her, saw all of them. Thomas knelt down beside the piano. "You saved us," he said quietly. Hannah placed her hand on the other shoulder. "Now let us see you." Bill stepped closer. "You don't have to be invisible anymore." Rebecca had tears streaming down her face. "It's okay to let go." Isaiah's hands fell from the keys. His whole body was shaking. And then he broke. He bent forward, his face in his hands, and he sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from 3 years of grief held so tightly he'd almost forgotten it was there. Vanessa wrapped her arms around him from behind. Thomas put a hand on his back. Hannah held his hand. Bill and Rebecca moved closer, forming a wall of support. 5 strangers. 5 people whose lives Isaiah had touched with his music. 5 people who were now healing him in return. "I couldn't save him," Isaiah choked out between sobs. "I couldn't save my son." "I know," Vanessa whispered. "I know. He needed me, and I wasn't there." "But you're here now," Thomas said firmly. "You're here, and you've been showing up for everyone else. That means something." "Caleb wouldn't want you to disappear," Rebecca said. "He'd want you to live." Isaiah looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. "How do you know?" "Because I know what it's like to love someone and lose them. And I know that the people we love want us to be happy, even when they're gone. Especially when they're gone." Isaiah's breath hitched. He pulled Caleb's letter from his pocket, held it up with shaking hands. "He forgave me," Isaiah whispered. "He said it wasn't my fault." "Then maybe it's time you forgave yourself," Hannah said gently. Isaiah looked at each of them. These 5 people who had been strangers weeks ago, who had come to him broken and left a little more whole. And now they were here for him. He wasn't invisible anymore. "I'm so tired," Isaiah whispered. "I'm so tired of carrying this." "Then put it down," Bill said. "You don't have to carry it alone." Isaiah closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath. And for the first time in 3 years, he let himself imagine a future where the weight wasn't crushing him, where he could remember Caleb with love instead of guilt, where he could play music not as penance, but as celebration. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. That would take time. But it was a beginning. "Thank you," Isaiah whispered. "No," Vanessa said. "Thank you." They stayed there for a long time, a circle of 6 people, connected by music, by pain, by healing. And when Isaiah finally put his hands back on the keys, he played something different. Not grief, not penance, hope. 6 months later, Washington Square Park looked the same as always. Street performers, tourists, students, the endless hum of New York City life. And at the piano, Isaiah Bennett. But something was different now. People didn't walk past him anymore. They stopped. They listened. They stayed. And Isaiah didn't play with his eyes closed anymore. He looked at the people around him. He saw them. And they saw him. Vanessa came by every Thursday after her morning shift. Sometimes she brought her kids. Aisha would sit on the bench next to Isaiah and ask him about the songs. Marcus would dance. Thomas volunteered at the community center 3 days a week. But he always made time to stop by the park, to listen, to remember that he was still alive for a reason. Hannah had quit her accounting job. She was struggling financially. But she was painting again. Her first gallery show was next month. And the centerpiece, a portrait of Isaiah titled Invisible No More. Bill had found transitional housing. He was sober. He'd even started teaching a philosophy discussion group at the shelter. Small steps. But steps forward, Rebecca and Ryan were dating. She still wore Caleb's ring around her neck. But her hand was free. And she was happy. Really, truly happy. And Isaiah was still playing. Still healing people with his music. But now he was healing himself, too. He'd enrolled in grief therapy. He'd reconnected with some of his former students. He was even considering teaching again. Maybe not at Juilliard, but somewhere. Because Caleb had asked him not to give up music. And Isaiah was finally ready to honor that request. As the sun set over Washington Square Park, Isaiah played one more song. A new composition. One he'd been working on for weeks. It was called Caleb's Song. It started with sadness, with loss, with the ache of missing someone so much you think you might break. But then it shifted to gratitude for the 16 years they had together, for the love that didn't disappear just because Caleb did, for the lessons learned through pain, and finally it ended with hope, for the future, for healing, for the possibility that even the most invisible among us can be seen, can be saved, can save others. As the last note faded, Isaiah opened his eyes. The small crowd that had gathered applauded softly. And for the first time in 3 years, Isaiah Bennett smiled. A real smile. Not forced, not fake, real. Because he'd learned something important. Sometimes the healer needs healing too. Sometimes the invisible need to be seen. And sometimes the best way to forgive yourself is to let others remind you that you're worthy of forgiveness. Isaiah looked down at the piano keys, at his hands. The same hands that had played Carnegie Hall. The same hands that had held his son as a baby. The same hands that were now giving comfort to strangers. He placed them on the keys one more time, and he played